Hello and welcome to Risky Business. My name is Katie Kieran Marble, Marble Law Firm. I'm an employment attorney located in Bedford, New Hampshire, and I am joined here today with my co-host, Michelle Bray.
Good morning, and thank you again for joining us today, and a little excited to share some information with you. HR Synergy is the outsourced human resource solution for small businesses with 1 to 100 employees, You can reach HR Synergy by calling 603-261-2402, email info@hrsynergyllc.com, or visit our website at hrsynergyllc.com. Also, follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, and Twitter for regular updates.
Very nice. I guess I should give you my contact info too. I'm also on all of those social media outlets. You can find me at nhemploymentlaw.com. Email is katie@nhemploymentlaw.com, and the phone number is 603-769-3136. Well, Michelle and I are excited today to talk about the upcoming new law in Massachusetts regarding paid sick leave. So I'm going to leave it to Michelle to do a little brief overview of it, and then we're going to talk about some of the more specific details of the law.
Nice. So, back in November, I believe it was, they approved a law for Massachusetts employers are now required to offer paid sick leave to employees, and there are some specific criteria, but up to 40 hours of sick leave per year for employees, for full-time employees, actually. So I think, what we'll do is we'll go through some of the specifics, because there are also some details for there's criteria for how many employees you must have and how that works for it to be paid. Mm-hmm. And if you're less than that criteria, then you still have to offer sick time, but it doesn't have to be paid sick time. So I think that's probably a good segue into really covering some of the criteria for the law.
Absolutely. So let's start with some of the basics, which is how many employees do you have to have before you're required to offer paid sick leave?
So that would be 11 employees, okay, which is, a pretty small amount for some of these small businesses, and could probably be quite costly. But if you plan ahead, that's a good thing. And, this takes effect on July 1st of this year. So you do have a little bit of time to plan for this additional expense this year.
Right. So you mentioned that if you have 11 employees, you're required to offer paid sick leave. What if you're a business that has less than 11?
So if you have less than 11 employees, you still have to offer the sick leave, but it does not have to be paid. Okay. And it's still the same criteria, 40 hours per year is maximum.
Right. Now, you mentioned earlier, for full-time employees, they can earn up to 40 hours of sick leave in the year, paid or unpaid, depending on the size of the employer. What about part-time employees that might work less than 40 hours?
So part-time employees, they actually prorate. Mm-hmm. So for every employee who works 30 hours per week, every 30 hours they gain an hour of sick pay. Sick leave, if you will. Mm-hmm. So if they work less than, it has to be prorated based upon their regular hours.
Okay, very nice. Now, for what purposes can an employee use this sick time?
So they can use sick time when they're sick. Mm-hmm. They can use it. It also can be used for the latest leave in Massachusetts, domestic violence leave as well, as well as to care for a child. So those are some of the basic ones, and if I'm missing some, feel free to add in.
It's sort of the usual family criteria. It's just caring for yourself, your child, spouse, parent of spouse. And I know one thing that I read about recently was they actually define kind of child fairly broadly. If it's going to be somebody, whether it's biological child, adopted child, foster child, but there's language in the statute that says something to the effect of any other minor that you have accepted responsibility for, which is fairly broad because it may not mean that there's a legal responsibility for that child.
Sure, so I'll take your kids and, because
I've agreed.
Right, that's interesting. That's very big, huh?
It is. So now, as you mentioned earlier that this takes effect on July 1st, when do employees start accruing their time? Is it on July 1st?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And especially for new employees as well. They start accruing immediately when they're hired. However, they can't begin using it for 90 days.
You jumped to my next question. Thank you.
So sorry.
No, it's good. It means we're on the same page. Now, many of these, I know one of the things that you can take the time off for is a doctor's appointment or something fairly not lengthy in time. So what kind of increments can you take the leave in? Is it specific to, is it 1 hour?
I believe you can take it as little as 1 hour increments, which, that kind of puts into employers need to consider what their policies are right now for some of their sick leave, where I know some of my clients may say, it has to be a whole day or a half a day or what have you. So they're going to have to adjust their employee handbooks to reflect that policy.
Absolutely. And I know there is a part of the law too that says it's either 1 hour or whatever the smallest increment of your payroll system. And I know payroll systems vary significantly in how you track your time. But again, you're right. And I know that I have many clients that for their paid or unpaid sick leave, it's a half a day, it's a full day, which brings me to another point, which I was going to ask you about what employers need to be doing now to get ready for this. Obviously, July 1st is, after this winter, thankfully coming fairly quickly.
Right.
But what should employers be doing now to get ready for this?
Well, I think, one of the most important things is they're going to have a viable tracking system to be able to do this. 11 employees is not all that great, but for the larger employees, that could be quite an administrative nightmare. So I definitely think that tracking systems are very important. Policies need to be put in place to communicate this information with employees and help them to understand what this new benefit is and how they can use it. And there is additional criteria or specifics throughout the policy. So, in regard to whether or not they can carry over time, if the time is paid out, how does it work out on termination? So it's very important to have a policy in place, as well as I mentioned, if they have an employee handbook, to get that employee handbook updated before July 1st.
Absolutely. And the handbook sometimes tends to be that document that sits in someone's drawer, and then a couple of years go by and the laws change quickly. So I always tell people it should be looked at least once a year.
Absolutely.
Particularly in Massachusetts, we've had 3 significant changes to leave laws within a 1-year period. And if you ignore that, you could potentially violate 3 separate laws. And that's never a good thing.
Right. And I don't recommend just handing it to an employee and saying, here's one of our latest changes. When I do handbooks with my clients, I actually roll them out with the employees and go through the specific policies. And so I can help them to understand. And if they have any questions about the policies, that's a good time to ask. Because you're right. If you just give them a piece of paper or an email, it's just going to get filed and no one's really going to take a good look at it.
Right. And I think communication with your employees is critical no matter what the change is. I think it's an excellent point. And I think another thing that I was thinking about as I was looking through this law is, this is not this ceiling. You're not capped at this. I'm sure there may be some very generous employers that offer more than this, and I don't think employers should feel like they need to scale back what they're offering people, because benefits are something that attract employees, keep your employees working for you. So this law is certainly not to say, hey, if you're a generous employer, stop. It's more to bring up the floor on those employers who aren't offering that. So I think that's important for people to keep in mind as they're looking at their policies, that, if you want to offer 60 hours or something above and beyond this, you shouldn't feel like, well, I don't have to, so I'm not going to anymore.
Right.
So you mentioned carryover. I know that's a big thing to have in your handbook, is what you can do with the time that you've accrued and when and where you can keep it and lose it. How much are you required to allow your employees to carry over?
So they can carry over up to 40 hours into the following year. They're not, employers, however, are not required to pay out more than 40 hours in a year.
Right.
So
That's an
it's
important
kind of a little
distinction.
tricky.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to carry over 40 hours and they're going to get 40 hours, they can't use it all in 1 year.
And that sounds like a tracking nightmare
It does.
me.
All the more reason that they really should have a good tracking system.
Now, what happens when an employee leaves you, whether they're terminated or voluntarily resign? Are you required to pay them the time that they've accrued?
Interestingly enough, they're not required to pay this time out. And I think that's very interesting because at one point, I believe the Massachusetts law was that it had to be paid out.
I know in New Hampshire, or sorry, in Massachusetts, you are required to pay out vacation time,
Right.
which is a fairly generous requirement under state law.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are many employers that are somewhat relieved that they're not going to be required to also pay out sick time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I know one thing that crops up a lot for my clients is they have an employee who's out for a period of time and they don't know a lot of the details. They don't know why. Are they really sick? Are they just taking the time off because they want to go to the beach today? Are employers allowed to ask for some kind of documentation if employees are out for an extended period of time?
Actually, they are allowed to ask for doctor's note, some type of certification if they're out for a period of time. However, I would recommend that that's something that is specified in your policy so that your employees know that you reserve the right to do that.
Right.
And you do that consistently across your workforce and not just pick and choose which employees, you ask for that doctor's note.
Right. And I understand the law is that you can ask for it once the employee's been out for 24 consecutive hours, which for most full-time employees will be 3 days, which I think is fairly a standard number. Under most employers' policies.
Right.
You're going to give somebody a couple days for a cold, but then after that, you're going to start to wonder if there's something more,
right.
And things like that. So now, will employers be required to post any information for their employees?
They will, and it's interesting because we're still waiting for the posting to show up. But from what I understand, the Attorney General is supposed to be preparing that. And hopefully that will be released before July 1st so that employers can get that information posted as well with all of their other employment posters.
Absolutely. And I think much like you mentioned earlier with the handbook and the tracking policies, you shouldn't just wait until July 1st and then realize, I need to get this posting. We should, as employers, we need to be looking proactively for that announcement to come out.
Correct.
Well,
absolutely.
Michelle, thank you so much for your information about this new law. It's very helpful, and I think we all know there's a lot of detail to all of these laws, and I always like to throw out there as the lawyer the disclaimer that this is not legal advice. This is informational. As companies are implementing their new practices and policies, they really should go to the law, make sure that what they're doing complies with the specifics of the law and how that law specifically applies to their business based on their size, their employee industry, and things like that.
Absolutely. And if you're not comfortable with reading the law, you really should reach out to an attorney or an HR professional that is familiar with the various employment laws. Absolutely.
Well, thank you all for joining us for today's episode of Risky Business. I am Katie Kiernan Marble, and I'm here with Michelle Gray. Our contact information is also on the screen, and we'll be with you as laws in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and federally change. And if you ever have any questions about that, I know we're both more than happy to answer those questions via email, phone, whatever is easiest.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.